Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. It is fall, my favorite time of year, and in honor of fall, I wanted to recommend to you some cozy fantasy books that you might want to pick up this season. So in today's video, I'm going to be recommending 15 cozy fantasy books that are perfect for fall. My haunted ring light has decided to join us, as is only appropriate for October. Obviously, what people find cozy can be a little bit individual, and not everybody finds all the same things cozy, but I have a pretty wide range of options here. Some of them are more heavily fantasy or high fantasy, but books that are written in a way that feels cozy to me. Some of them I think are widely discussed as cozy fantasy, and then I have some cozy fantasy romances or romantasies as well. So hopefully a little bit of something for everyone. I'm going to start with my fantasy romance recommendations, and then we'll move on to other cozy fantasy recs. My first recommendation is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. If you haven't read this yet, it is delightful. It's a historical fantasy romance featuring the Fae and a young woman who has had half of her soul stolen by a member of the Fae when she was little, and it's a love story. It's really beautiful and cozy and genuinely romantic, very slow paced. Think like Jane Austen meets Fae mythology. So if you find that kind of a classic romance vibe cozy, I think this is going to work out really well for you. And the other thing that I think is kind of cool is the main character is coded as autistic, and the author has said in interviews that she wrote this around when she herself got an older diagnosis of autism and was kind of working through her feelings about that, which I think is really interesting. So Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. There are two other companion novels in this series. I have not read them personally, but I've heard good things about those as well. Next is A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. This is a very slow burn queer fantasy romance between a prince and his bodyguard, and I absolutely loved this. This is primarily a romance, I would say. I think if you go into this for the romance, you're gonna have a better time. If you go into it for the fantasy plot, it might come across as a little bit obvious or lackluster. I think a lot of the plot is really more a way of moving along the story and developing the romance between these two characters. It deals pretty well with power dynamics, which was something I was a little bit concerned about given the prince bodyguard status, but I think it's handled really well. It is very slow burn. We have a main character with severe anxiety and panic attacks that he's dealing with, and there are some really fantastic caretaking scenes in this. Very lovely, cozy, the perfect thing to kind of cuddle up with a blanket with in fall if you're into fantasy romance. Next is Radiance by Grace Draven. This is the perfect book if you like external conflict, where the things that are challenging the relationship are external to the couple themselves, because this follows two characters who are part of a political arranged marriage, and they are of different species and initially find each other physically repulsive, but become friends, make the best of things, and then slowly fall in love with each other. And it is such a beautiful story. It's another one that is definitely a slow burn, and it's two smart, compassionate, likable, nice people slowly falling in love and communicating really well with each other, and the struggles that they deal with are external to their relationship. It's cozy, and it is really beautiful and really romantic. Then if you want something that is a little bit more on the erotic side, but is still surprisingly sweet and cozy, I'm gonna recommend The Half-Orc's Maiden Bride by Ruby Dixon. This follows an arranged marriage between a human and a half-orc, and includes some kind of out there wedding customs that she goes through, but their relationship with each other and the way that he is so concerned about her comfort and her consent is really lovely. This is also really great if you're looking for books with tall, plus-size women characters. I like that, and I just think this is a lovely book, and it was surprisingly sweet, surprisingly cozy, even though it is on the more erotic side. It's not very long, it's a novella, but I would recommend it. The next book is my final romance recommendation, and to be fair, some of the other books do have romance in them, but I wouldn't call them fantasy romance specifically. So this one is probably one you've heard about before, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is a contemporary witchy fantasy romance that is very sweet, very cozy, follows a woman who ends up taking a job teaching some young witches to control their magic, and along the way falling in love with one of their guardians. I really enjoyed this, and I know that she's got another book coming out really soon that looks equally delightful. Next, I'm going to recommend two fantasy classics that I think really fit this vibe. And, you know, be forewarned, these are classics. They were written quite a while ago, and so the language isn't entirely modern, which might be a turnoff for some people, but I think if you're into that, they're fantastic. The first one is the most well-known, and that is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. And really anything in the Lord of the Rings series or universe could fit this. I think the way that Tolkien writes is just really lovely and slow-paced and cozy and feels like fall to me. This is one of my favorite versions of a journey book. I'm not usually a big journey book person, but the way that Tolkien writes The Fellowship of the Ring just totally works and sucks me into the story. Again, slow-paced, a classic, but I feel like this is a perfect cozy fall fantasy if you want to pick up something that's a little bit older. My other recommendation is much less well known than Tolkien's work, but was actually published quite a bit earlier, and that is Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees. This is one of the first fantasy novels published by a woman, and it came out in 1926. It is slow-paced, but it's really delightful. It's set in this small town that is a little bit strange and is on the edges of the land of the Fae. So this has a lot of Fae mythology and eerie moments, but also quite a bit of humor with the quirky townspeople and some of the problems that arise. So this is one that not as many people are familiar with, but if you want to try some pre-Tolkien fantasy by a female author, I would suggest Blood in the Mist. My next three recommendations are books that I would call modern classics, and one of these is not even that old, but I think these are books that have a lot of staying power and that are going to continue to be around for a long time, and they all have this very cozy vibe to them. First up is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. You know that this had to be on the list. The Name of the Wind is one of my all-time favorite books, and I think it is exactly these cozy fall vibes. The framing device of the story is literally set in this cozy pub where stories are being told, and it's just this beautiful, lyrically written tale. It's a coming-of-age story, but also a story of magic and this sweeping world. I absolutely love it. Yes, I don't know when, if ever, we're gonna get book 3, but regardless, I think there's just so much in this to enjoy. So The Name of the Wind, to me, is perfect for cozy fall fantasy. Next is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This is interesting. It is quiet and very slow-paced and intricately put together. It's very character driven. It's following this half goblin who never expected to become emperor, but when some things happen and all of his family members are killed off, he unexpectedly has to step into that role and is struggling with his sense of identity, struggling with how to fulfill that role well, and also trying to investigate what happened and what was the conspiracy that led to the death of his father and siblings. So I liked The Goblin Emperor. I don't think it's going to be for everyone because it is very slow moving, but I think if you like that kind of fantasy, this might be a good pick for you. And this is the kind of fantasy that I'm more interested in picking up in the fall and in the winter. It definitely gives me autumnal vibes. Finally, for my modern classics category is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. And really this entire Winter Night trilogy is phenomenal. These are drawing on Russian mythology set during this time period where there's a transition from traditional folk religion to Christianity. And this first book, a lot of it is set in the dead of winter. So this is the perfect fall or winter read where you want to get cozy and be by a fire. I feel like The Bear and the Nightingale is perfect for that, and it has a really strong female main character. I love this entire series. It's beautiful. I have a few more. I don't know that they're as easily categorizable, but we'll start with the most obvious book to be on this list if you've been anywhere around sci-fi fantasy for the last year or so, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. High fantasy, low stakes, good company. This is a perfect read if you like a very low stakes cozy read. If you don't need a lot of plot and you don't mind spending a ton of time in small details of what it takes to open a coffee shop in a fantasy world, this is your book. I feel like people are very split on this, but personally, I really loved it. I found it to be really comforting, especially when it came out in the middle of the COVID pandemic. This was exactly what I was wanting, something that felt safe and easy to read and something I could kind of relax into. I think this is great for that. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was definitely mine. This follows Viv, an orc barbarian who, after decades of adventuring, and there she is in all her glory, after decades of adventuring, has decided to hang up her sword and open a coffee shop. And so this is just about her opening a coffee shop, and I loved it. It does have a very low-key sapphic romance in it, but I wouldn't call this a fantasy romance. I don't think it's enough of the plot for that. But I do think this is very cozy and for sure deserves to be on this list. Next is a novella series, and I own almost all of them. I think I own 3 out of the 4, but this is the Singing Hills cycle by Nevo. The first one is The Empress of Salt and Fortune. The one I don't have is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountains, Then We Have Into the Riverlands, and Mammoths at the Gates. I love these, and I would definitely call them cozy fantasy. They follow a character named Cleric Chi, whose job it is to collect memories and history. And so each of these follows Cleric Chi on their journeys in a particular area, collecting these memories and these stories. I think they're all really delightful. My favorite, though, is the most recent one, Mammoths at the Gates, which is where Cleric Chi goes home to the Singing Hills Abbey for the first time in many years. And this is a book about grief and the challenges of returning to your childhood home when you're not a child anymore. I love Nevo's writing, and I think these are lovely and really cozy. My next recommendation is one for people who like a slow-paced, poetic book that is all about the vibes, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is another one that I think people are really split on, whether they love it or they don't. I absolutely adored this. This was so my thing. It has such a love of stories and storytelling within it, and it's this kind of dreamlike journey. I don't even want to explain what exactly the book is about because I don't want to spoil things, but I loved this. I understand that it is too slow-paced for some people and doesn't have enough clear plot. I was a fan. The other thing I enjoyed about this is it reminded me of the experience of playing an open world RPG video game. I was reading it and there were scenes where it felt like what it's like to solve a puzzle in an RPG video game or something, except not so interactive. And so I was not at all surprised to see that the author was in fact inspired by Dragon Age, which is an excellent series of RPG video games. Highly recommend. So The Starless Sea, I'm a fan, and I do find this quite cozy. It's a lot about books and storytelling and history and time. I love it. My next one is a little bit of a wild card because it's something that I find really cozy, but I don't know I don't know that everybody would find it cozy necessarily. That is Written and Read by Anne Bishop. It is the start of the Others series, and there are a lot of conversations that could be had about this book. She does some really interesting things, and there are some darker elements to what's going on. The main character has escaped from being held prisoner because she's somebody where under bloodletting she has prophecies, and so she has escaped and is in this place that is safe for her, but there's a lot of dangerous things happening in the world. But I just loved it because we spend a lot of time in this sort of commune where she finds safety and finds community, and I don't know, I loved it. I found this really cozy and really lovely. I will say I don't have enough time to get into the details in this video. You can check out my Goodreads review if you want to hear kind of more of my thoughts on this, but there are people who have critiqued her handling of Indigenous people because it's kind of like an alternate fantasy version of the United States. And I would argue, given the end of the series, which I'm not going to spoil, but given the end of the series, that she's trying to critique colonizers, but it is fair that maybe she didn't go about it in the best way. Anyway, but there's been some discussion about that, which I think is interesting, but I did really love it and I found it to be really cozy. My last suggestion is a book that I feel like has been underhyped and not everybody is loving it the way that I did, but I absolutely adored this. The Warden by Daniel M. Ford. I didn't expect this to be as cozy as it is. It's kind of like Twin Peaks, but with wizards and queer and cozy. So it's got like the small town weirdness and things going on. We have a bisexual wizard female main character who also does some necromancy, who has been assigned to be the warden of this small town that she has to take care of. But it's also just this quiet, lovely, cozy small town story as well, even though there are moments of action in the middle of it. So I think if you're looking for a cozy fantasy, this is fantastic. So there you have it, 15 books that I think are really cozy and perfect to read in fall. I loved all of these and hopefully you found something new that you want to go and check out. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. And for question of the day, I would love to hear, what is a book that you find cozy to pick up for fall? Ideally fantasy. If you want to recommend something else as well, that's fine, but is there a fantasy book that is one that's your go-to, or a book that you just think gives you those perfect cozy autumnal vibes? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.